started then. And again, welcome everybody. I'm Rabbi Harry Rosenfeld in Albuquerque. It's Congregation Albert's Zoom link that we're Zoom account that we're on. And again, please rename yourself. I don't know how if we can't let anybody in or have anybody in that says iPad, iPhone, or a series of numbers or an email address. We can't tell. We need names. So if you can do that, that's great. If you don't know how to do that, just put a note in the chat box. And otherwise, when we finish the introduction, we're going to have to ask those of you who can't do that or haven't done that yet to leave. So Rabbi Litwack.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm delighted that you're all with us. I hope you had a nice 4th of July. I'm really excited about tonight, and particularly our scholar for the evening, Rabbi Amy Scheinerman, who my congregation has now heard for the last several weeks, that Rabbi Scheinerman was somebody that I tried to bring in for my own scholar in residence, and our schedule didn't work out. So now we get a chance to study with her. Rabbi Scheinerman is a gifted, as you will see, a gifted teacher of Talmud. She's written 2 books, the Talmud of Relationships, Volume 1 and Volume 2. I encourage you to get them. They are in my library. She is a hospice rabbi in Maryland. She serves on the Responsa Committee for the Central Conference of American Rabbi, and as the editor of the Torah commentary column for our own CCAR newsletter. She received her BA from Brown University, studied at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem and Princeton Theological Seminary, and was ordained, as all of your rabbis were, at HUC JIR, Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, where she received her Doctorate of Divinity in 2009. It's really my pleasure to welcome Rabbi Scheinerman to be our guest and to teach us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you all, and welcome to everybody. So wonderful to be with you all, and from 9 states throughout the country, stretching from coast to coast. So welcome if you're from California, Florida, Illinois, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, Texas, Virginia, and I'm probably the only one from Maryland. Is that a safe guess? Probably pretty safe. And thank you to all my wonderful colleagues who invited me to share some Talmud with you here today. This session was inspired by a local young single mathematician who lives nearby. At the beginning of our lockdown here in Maryland, he shared with me that thanks to the lockdown, his family has a new way of celebrating Shabbat. They have dinner together, coast to coast, via Zoom. His parents are in California, his sister's in Manhattan, and he, of course, is here in Maryland. He described how wonderful these weekly Shabbat dinners have been for them all, and what a special, special pleasure and treat it is for his parents who cannot travel to visit their kids, nor can their kids travel to visit them. So that's what had me thinking along these lines and chose this passage. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote about Shabbat words that have a particular resonance just now. He wrote in his slim little volume, The Sabbath, "It is one of life's highest rewards, a source of strength and inspiration to endure tribulation, to live nobly." I think those are wonderful words to hear right now and to take to heart. The cultural Zionist, Echad Ha'am, famously wrote, "More than Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews." Shabbat observance in creation has been a pillar of our tradition since, well, I suppose we can say since creation. Days are a function of the rotation of the earth. Months reflect the cycle of the moon. The year is determined by Earth's journey around the sun. But Shabbat reflects creation itself. 6 days of creation followed by the 7th day of rest. Hence, Shabbat is imitatio Dei, it's imitation of God, but also built right into the structure of the universe at the very same time. So today, let's ask ourselves, is Shabbat built into our lives? And what role does it play in the structure of our lives? Because it might be a little technologically complicated, I did have a 1-minute video for you, but I think what I'm going to do instead is show you the words, and you're going to have to imagine that I wanted to pick a paean to Shabbat from a source you wouldn't expect me to choose. So here it is, and we'll just read it. But I'll send anybody the link if they want. It's just a 1-minute video. This comes from the 2018 film by Wim Wenders, which debuted at the Cannes Film Festival. And it's a documentary entitled Pope Francis, a Man of His Time. And here's what he says in the midst of it. He says, we live with the accelerator down from morning to night. This ruins mental health, spiritual health, and physical health. More so, it affects and destroys the family, and therefore society. On the 7th day, God rested. What the Jews followed and still observe was to consider the Sabbath as holy. On Saturday, you rest. One day of the week, that's the least. Out of gratitude, to worship God, to spend time with the family, to play, to do all these things. We are not machines. The rabbis, unsurprisingly, have a lot to say about Shabbat. They devote an entire tractate to the complex laws and detailed minutiae of Shabbat. But there is a passage that I particularly want to share with you that is somewhat different. It addresses the meaning and value of Shabbat in our own personal and spiritual lives. As I see it, the passage is composed of 4 distinct pieces, so I want to present it to you that way. So think of it in 4 parts, and we'll start with part 1. And part 1 is a story. The rabbis understand that for us to value something, be it a relationship, an object, or a piece of time, we need to invest in it. The more we invest, the more we value it. And the more we invest and value it, the greater magic it holds for us. They told this beautiful story in the Bavli, in the Babylonian Talmud, in Tractate Shabbat. Joseph, who cherishes Shabbat. There was a Gentile in his neighborhood whose property was extremely valuable. The astrologer said to him, that is to the Gentile, all his property will pass to Joseph, who cherishes Shabbat. He, the Gentile, went and sold all his property, bought a pearl with the proceeds, and we're to imagine this is a pearl unlike any you've ever seen, and placed it in his hat. What he's doing is he's trying to take all of his assets, reduce it to one extraordinary gem, and prevent the astrologer's prediction from coming to pass. As he was crossing a river by ferry to get away from Joseph, the wind blew his hat off and cast it into the water. A fish swallowed the pearl. The fish was removed, that is, it was caught by a fisherman, and brought ashore late in the day on Shabbat Eve. The fisherman said, "Who buys it now?" The other people in the market said to the fisherman, "Go, bring it to Yosef, who cherishes Shabbat, because he regularly purchases delicacies for Shabbat." They brought it to him. Yosef purchased it. He cut it open. He found the pearl inside. He sold it for 13 vessels filled with golden dinars. A certain elderly man encountered him and said, "One who borrows for the sake of Shabbat, Shabbat repays him." And a quick aside, if there are any young children in your life, you might like to gift them with Marilyn Hirsch's Joseph Who Loved the Sabbath, which is a clever and compelling expansion of the story with marvelous illustrations by Divis Gribu. Here's a question to ponder. Do you think we're meant to take this story literally? If you keep Shabbat, you'll become wealthy. And if that's not the message, what is the message? Certainly the sages want us to know that our investment in Shabbat pays enormous dividends for us. That's the first part. We'll put all these parts together at the end. Now we're going to move into part 2. Please recall that Torah presents Shabbat as an inherent part of the very structure of the universe, not a lovely addition or overlay or add-on. Without Shabbat, there is no universe. It's baked into creation. Perhaps with this in mind, the rabbis focus on the first words of Genesis chapter 2. Chapter 2 opens with a short passage that traditionally is chanted on Friday evening prior to or as a prelude to Kiddush. So let me put that up on your screen for you. Here's Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. They speak of the holiness of Shabbat, which is the purpose of Kiddush. So these verses are chanted prior to the blessing that is Kiddush, that sanctifies Shabbat. And it may sound familiar to you. It starts like this. Vayechulu hashamayim v'haaretz v'chol tzivam. But while your copy of the Torah and what's on your screen has vowels, in the time of the Talmud, Torah had no vowels. Vowels were added in the 7th or 8th centuries by a group of scholars called the Masoretes. This provides an interpretive opportunity for the rabbis, who often suggest alternative vowels to the ones that by their time already have come to be accepted as the proper pointing. Returning to our Talmud passage, that's precisely what they do. And it's a magnificent example of this interpretive method. Rava said, and some say it was Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, even an individual who prays on Shabbat evening must recite Vayechulu. And when he says Vayechulu, and everywhere in this passage where it says Vayechulu, they don't mean just that first word, they mean the first 3 verses of Genesis chapter 2. As Rav Hamnuna said, anyone who prays on Shabbat evening and recites Vayechulu, again, all 3 verses, the verses ascribed that person credit as if they became a partner with the Holy Blessed One in the act of creation. As it is stated, and the heaven and the earth were finished, Vayechulu hashamayim v'haaretz. So let me give you a quick preview of what's to come. The rabbis are going to read the word Vayechulu to say that it means we are not merely creatures in God's universe, but actual co-creators with God of the universe. Please recall that Torah doesn't yet have vowels when they're writing this, so here's how Rav Hamnuna does that. He says, do not read Vayechulu, were finished, but rather Vayechalu, they finished. Also on your slide is a chart, and I'm hoping that this will make things a little clearer and therefore be helpful. I don't mean it to be off-putting, I mean it to be as helpful as possible. So let me explain what you have here. a very small change in the vowel under the kaf, the third letter of Vayichulu, transforms the verb from passive to active voice, thereby also changing the subject of the verb and the entire meaning of the phrase. This is what Torah says. Vayichulu, heaven and earth were finished. And if they were finished, we know that means by God. Rav Hamnuna wants us to read it, really understand its meaning, as Vayechalu, heaven and earth finished. So we ask ourselves, finished what? What did they finish? What's the object of the active verb finished? What they finished was the creation of the universe. What can that mean, that heaven and earth finished the creation of the universe? That does sound peculiar, doesn't it? Because we know that what Torah is saying is that they themselves were created, heaven and earth. They were finished. So what does it mean that heaven and earth finished the creation of the universe? And Rav Hamnuna understands this way, that heaven connotes God and earth connotes humanity, where earth lives. Hence, we are God's co-creators, at least from the last day onward, at least for the very last part of creation. And the passage continues. Rabbi Elazar will now underscore the potency of speech, which is what we're playing with here. We're playing with, what did God say? Rabbi Elazar said, whence do we know that speech is like action? As it stated, and please, let's give him credit. He's found the perfect verse in Psalm 33 to make his point. By the word of Adonai, the heavens were made, and all their hosts by the breath of God's mouth. Is this 100% consistent and logical? After all, the universe was created before we were. No, but it's a very powerful claim. By observing Shabbat, we become partners and, as it were, co-creators of the universe. So please consider for a moment the implications of that statement. As co-creators, we are responsible with God for the universe. Rav Hamnuna's reading both empowers and exhorts us to step up to the plate. Two more pieces to the passage, both concerning the role of the ministering angels. I didn't quite get you what I wanted, so I apologize, but I hope it is, you should read Rav Chisda on your screen now. I hope it's there. Rav Chisda said that Mar Ukva said, one who prays on Shabbat evening and recites Vayichulu, again, all three verses from the beginning of chapter Genesis 2, the two ministering angels who accompany the person place their hands on the person's head and say, and your iniquity has passed and your sin has been atoned. This verse comes from the book of the prophet Isaiah. Who are these angels? Rabbi Morris Margolis wrote a lovely book entitled A Gathering of Angels. It is his exploration of what angels mean in Jewish tradition. And he says there that angels provide a more tangible image of God's nearness, that the notion of God is so remote and so other that people look for something closer and more tangible, and that is the function of angels as intermediaries of sorts between a physical world that we live in and the incorporeal world that we imagine for God. In other words, angels are an image to remind us of God's nearness. The claim seems to be that reciting the passage Vayechulu, those 3 verses from Genesis chapter 2, preparing for Shabbat, as Joseph did, and assuming the role and responsibility of partnership with God will afford us divine forgiveness for our sins and function as our atonement for our failings of the past week. Or is it that one who incorporates Shabbat seriously into their life could never conceive of entering the holy time of Shabbat without first having reconciled with God? That the advent of Shabbat inspires one who takes Shabbat seriously to seek God's forgiveness and do their utmost to repair what they've done wrong through appropriate atonement? Could that be his meaning? So please consider the spiritual value of this for your life. Shabbat affords spiritual cleansing. We clean the slate with God, like a mini Yom Kippur, and let go of guilt. We can enter the week to come with higher ideals and expectations for ourselves if we're not shouldering guilt from the previous week. That is genuine spiritual refreshment and renewal that has a purpose. The purpose is to go ahead and create the next week. The angels have yet another role to play. So one last story, which might be familiar to you because this one is the source of the very popular Shabbat hymn, Shalom Aleichem. It was taught in a Baraita, and a Baraita is a Mishnaic era teaching, an early teaching. It was taught, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says, 2 ministering angels accompany a person on Shabbat evening from the synagogue to their home, one good and one evil. So recall that in those days, and still many people today, go for Kabbalat Shabbat and Mariv early as the sun is setting, and then they go home for dinner afterwards. And that's the scenario they're talking about. If, when they reach home, they find a lamp burning and a table set and a bed made, the good angel says, "May it be your will that it shall be like this for another Shabbat." And the evil angel, imagine him scowling, answers against his will, "Amen." But if not, if the home is not prepared for Shabbat, the lamp isn't burning, the table isn't set, the bed isn't made, the evil angel says, "May it be your will that it shall be so." My apologies. The evil angel says, "May it be your will that it shall be so for another Shabbat." And the good angel answers against his will, "Amen." The 2 angels are ubiquitous in Jewish art. Here's one example. Note the 2 white-winged angels. And here's another one. Do you see the good angel and the bad angel peering in through the window? Enjoy that for a moment because I think there's some noise on my end that I can remove for you. So please excuse me for one moment. I particularly like that one. I like the families sitting together and enjoying their Shabbat dinner filled with music and singing and flowers. And the 2 angels, one is looking contentedly through the window and the other seems to have a bit of a scowl on his face because the bad angel is the one who has had to say, "Amen." What lies behind the second story about Shabbat angels? I think it has something to do with the role that habit plays in our lives. Behavioral psychologists tell us that habit is one of the strongest determinants of our behavior, and that it is far stronger, far more powerful than either commitment or willpower. Now, that might be disappointing, but we can also turn it to our advantage. And the rabbis understood this, that formulating constructive habits will carry over from one Shabbat to the next. And the payoff is now clearly spelled out in a shorthand of sorts by the specific items that are mentioned in the Talmudic passage. Do you remember that it was the candles and the table and the bed? Candles symbolize light and insight, the spiritual refreshment of Shabbat, or perhaps also the intellectual refreshment of Shabbat. The table, well, that was depicted beautifully in that second piece of art. Food and fellowship, physical and social refreshment, and very important part of Shabbat. And the third, the bed, certainly represents rest, but also sexual union. Sexual and emotional refreshment are also important components of Shabbat. So now we've seen 4 parts, the overall structure of the passage, 4 distinct pieces, and I want to suggest a way that these 4 pieces fit together to convey a coherent and carefully crafted worldview about Shabbat. The first is the story of Joseph, who cherishes Shabbat, makes an introductory claim that when you make an effort to celebrate Shabbat, and notice this was Joseph's habit week after week, you get back more than you invest. This story may strike us as hyperbolic allegory, but it embodies a broader truth nonetheless about our investment of time, energy, and resources, and its paybacks. The second part was Rava, or Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, about how to understand the word Vayechulu, and he wanted to change the vowels to Vayechalu, and he taught us that we are to think of ourselves as God's partner in creation. Shabbat then reminds us of our very large and significant spiritual purpose in the universe. Mar Ukva's teaching about angels who hear us say Vayechulu, and that conveys God's forgiveness and spiritual reconciliation. Shabbat observance ensures forgiveness and serves as atonement. In other words, keeping Shabbat keeps us right with God. And the fourth part, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda's story about the good angel and the bad angel that accompany us home and affirm what they see, serves maybe as a warning that Shabbat is not magic after all. It's about making a commitment and doing something incredibly mundane, even banal, forming a habit so that we can keep that commitment. Another section of the Talmud from a tractate called Avodah Zarah says, whoever took the trouble the day before Shabbat, that is, who took the time to prepare for Shabbat on Friday, will eat on Shabbat. Whoever didn't bother the day before Shabbat, what would they eat on Shabbat? So I'd like to offer some conclusions, and then I think we probably have questions, and maybe there's a way we can have some discussion. The experience of Shabbat touches us physically, emotionally, spiritually, and the pieces of this passage touch on each and every element. Physically, we start there with Joseph, who works so diligently to physically prepare for Shabbat. Another perspective on the physical, Shabbat attunes us to the rhythms of the natural world, from the heavenly luminaries that define the passage of time, bracketing the arrival and departure of Shabbat, to the astonishing complexity and beauty of the world we inhabit and of which we are an integral part. And for many people I know, and myself included, one of the wonders of Shabbat is to get out of the normal world, which involves a whole lot of technology and screens, and out into the natural world. The second is emotional. Emotion permeates the entire passage. The neurologist and author Oliver Sacks, recalling his childhood growing up in an observant Jewish family in London, in a piece he published in the New York Times shortly before his death in 2015, wrote, "The peace of the Sabbath, of a stopped world, a time outside time, was palpable, infused everything, and I found myself drenched with a wistfulness. I find my thoughts drifting to the Sabbath, the day of rest, the seventh day of the week, and perhaps the seventh day of one's life as well, when one can feel that one's work is done and one may, in good conscience, rest." And touching on the spiritual, the central focus is on how Shabbat observance brings us close to God, can bring us close to God. And I wouldn't hesitate to say, however we conceive of God. There is no particular way one has to think about God, no particular image or belief system one has to have for this to work for you. Whatever you consider to be ultimate or divine, however you think of God, this passage addresses that. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote, "The Sabbath is the presence of God in the world, open to the human soul. And Shabbat is the presence of the world, open to us, open to our souls." So my first conclusion that I would like to share with you is this encompassing nature of Shabbat, that it has these magnificent elements that Talmud is teaching us, the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual, that these are the wonderful gifts, the wonderful magic, the wonderful payoff, if you prefer, of keeping Shabbat, however it is you keep it. The second conclusion is the passage teaches us how magic happens. It serves as a very down-to-earth reminder that while Shabbat is magic, it doesn't happen by magic. It requires establishing habits, making investments, and sometimes they're pretty ordinary, pretty banal elements that contribute to making it sacred and magical. And that's a marvelous element. And the third is a connection to what we are all going through separately, but also together. This pandemic. This is a little bit of a piece written by Lynn Unger. She writes, and she's not Jewish, as far as I know. It's not from a Jewish website. "What if you thought of it as the Jews consider the Sabbath?" And she's talking about the pandemic. "The most sacred of times. Cease from travel, cease from buying and selling. Give up, just for now, on trying to make the world different than it is. Sing, pray, touch only those to whom you commit your life. Center down." My guess is all of us have experienced some of that in this slow down and very different way of living these past few months. So perhaps that will resonate for some people. Were there questions that came through?
Amy, Larry Mallinger, first of all, thank you again so much for sharing with us. And I apologize for my tardiness. Unfortunately, a pastoral emergency took over my time.
No problem.
So there were a couple of questions. The text that you were sharing with the magic, sorry about that, that's my house now. 1 second. Okay. The magic of Shabbat. someone had asked a passage that when you were talking about Rav Chisa. I believe that is in the Talmud, Shabbat 118, 119, around there somewhere.
I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of difficulty hearing you.
Wait, hold on, make sure everything's on right. Yep. You hear me now?
You're asking where this passage comes from?
Right, the Rav Chisa passage when you talked
The
about.
whole thing is 119, Shabbat 119.
Okay. So only because I'm aware.
Part of it is on A, part of it is on B.
Gotcha. Only because I'm aware of that text. I'm questioning the one that comes right after it. Talks about not being miserly in your Shabbat celebration, no matter what your limits are. Make it special, make it unique. You were talking about the magic. Can you talk a little bit more or share a little bit more that the celebration of Shabbat does not mean you go bankrupt, but it also doesn't mean that you scrimp on it either?
I think for me, what's important is to make it different from the other days of the week. And that's a matter of individual values and what it is that makes for a person or for a household, for a family, a unique and special celebration of the day. I don't think it need be about how much money we spend at all. And a family who would rather give that extra money to tzedakah and have a simpler Shabbat, but sit around the table for 2 hours singing songs and reading stories, that to me would be a lovely way to spend Shabbat.
Thank you. We'd like to invite our guests, communities from all across North America. If you have any questions, if you'll just put it in the chat room, I'll be more than happy. So the question or the statement is: days, months, and years each reflect an astronomical cycle. Weeks do not. So couldn't it be said that Shabbat is not uniquely embedded in the structure of the universe?
My point was that it is because of our sacred literature. And it is the one that reflects God's action in creating the universe.
I'm going to ask you to push that a little bit more.
Creators, then it is also our input into the universe. This is to be understood on a religious level, coming from the literature. I do appreciate the astronomy and the physics behind it, but I think they're trying to deliver a message that they want us to understand on a spiritual level.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Please send them our way so we can share together. While we're waiting, is unique. I have a wonderful congregant. So we do Kabbalah Shabbat dinners where we basically have an early service and have dinner together as a community. However, we always get into a little friendly tit for tat of what is defined as the appropriate Shabbat meal. And if you're not from Eastern Europe, that's where you get the division of thinking. I think it is possible to have a Shabbat meal that does not have roasted chicken and kasha and bow ties. That's just my opinion.
You don't think it's possible to do it without chicken?
I think it is, but hey, just a thought.
Okay, well, since we don't eat meat in this house, we always do it that way.
Gotcha. Hold on one second, I'm sorry.
So it took me a long time for my kids to convince me that if I made the pizza really fancy enough, that I could serve it on Shabbat.
There you go.
I make pizza from scratch. It's my husband's favorite food. But it was always the Motziei Shabbat food. It was the Saturday night meal. He claims it's written into the ketubah. I have yet to find it, but he swears it's there, and I should just trust him. Thank
you. And going back to the astronomical, when the fact it does say in the text on the seventh day, which of course is a fascinating text to teach because we have the concept 6 days God created the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day God rested. Except God has to create the seventh day before God can rest on it. So begs the question.
Kol hakavod to whoever put that one in.
So, yes.
Very nice. There are a lot of inconsistencies, aren't there? And we're not going to resolve all of them if we want to look at this as either a history book or a science book. That won't work.
Observing
But if we
Shabbat. Oh,
understand-
sorry, go ahead. Yeah, I don't want to cut you off. Go ahead, please. I don't want to cut you off.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
If we try to understand it the way it was meant to function and the meaning it conveys, then we don't need to worry about those things so much.
Okay. Going back to the interpretation of Vayachulu or Vayachlu, the question or the statement is, observing Shabbat requires human participation. And perhaps that's our way of being part of the creation of the universe. And I'm adding on each and every week.
Lovely. Beautiful. Thank you.
Then I have a question here. Do you think gathering in person is essential to the observance of Shabbat? I.e., are we missing something essential when we do Shabbat on Zoom?
Well, I guess we each have to answer that for ourselves.
Rabbi Malinger, we may want to add in with the next comment.
Thank you. So there is another comment. And I apologize. I'm not giving credit who this is sending this down. I'm just trying to get you the questions. But so that first part, are we gathering as a community? But the second part, how are we all reconciling the necessary shift from, quote, powering down in order to make Shabbat special to our current needs to be on screen in order to, quote, attend Shabbat worship in the community? What else can we do to make it special? Very similar to the question that I just shared.
Our tradition places, and very rightly so, an enormous premium on community, on bringing people together, to be with one another, to support one another, to encourage one another, to have affection for one another. So the screen is 2 dimensions, and it's not like being with a person in 3 dimensions. There's no doubt that I personally would rather be with other people. But this is a pretty good alternative. I'm sure all of us have sat and pondered, what would this lockdown be like, this stay home like? What would it have been like 15 years ago before all this technology wasn't available and we couldn't be in touch the way we are right now, and we couldn't have Shabbat? So I'm grateful for what we do have.
I don't disagree with you on that statement. However, we have been a pretty ingenuous people for, 2-3 millenniums, excuse me. And so I think we would have figured out something. What it would have been, I don't know, but we would have figured out something, because the fact is, we are recreating a new expression of the community right now so that we can have something. And
Right.
so, yeah.
We're doing the best we can.
Right. So along that same line, when you talk about Rav Chisa and the ministering angels, what they see, what they hear, and the question is, are we tricking the Sabbath angels?
I don't think the sages assumed that what you were doing was deceitful. I think they assumed the angels were observing what you're doing, and you do what you choose to do.
Fair enough. Going back to the whole Zoom model, one of our participants, apparently in their community, they do not have the Baruch Hu in their Zoom service. I'm gathering that their definition of community is not counting as a quorum. I would say, I can tell you, there is a diversity of rabbinic opinions on this as well.
Yes.
Whether a minyan can be electronic or otherwise.
Yes.
So.
And I think that's one of the great strengths of our tradition also, is that we have a very long tradition of responding to exigencies and needs. And we have a way of doing it and using our texts and our reasoning and our hearts to find solutions. And we don't all have to agree. The Jewish umbrella is big enough for all of us to stand under it. And that's fine.
Thank you. Any other questions, folks? Please send them our way. Give me a second here. Nope, we got nothing here. I don't know. I missed the very beginning, so I apologize. Going back to the ministering angels, what is the general consensus as to their origin? Because obviously our tradition had, especially in the text of the Torah, we have angels, i.e. messengers of God, that we're constantly interacting with, either wrestling, as is the case of Jacob, or those who come to Abraham and so forth. What is that all about? But before we get to that, I want to thank this person for this last question. You come home from prayer to find the table set, the bed made. That implies that someone, parentheses, the woman, question mark, is at home to do that. Please discuss and thank you. So you can do either one you like first.
The connection is not particularly good coming from between you and me, so I'm not sure I got all of that. I got the part about who's preparing everything. I don't think there's anything, they certainly assumed that there was a woman at home doing that work, but there's nothing that precludes a man from doing all those things and then bopping out to shul, or everybody in the family popping out. You're just walking down the block in those days, and it's not a long service, and then you come home. And I know that when I was a kid, we lit Shabbat candles, and then we went to shul in the evening and left the candles. But my mother would transfer the candlesticks to the kitchen sink because we had cats. And that always scared her. So I guess if you don't move your candlesticks, you light them in your kitchen sink. But there are ways around everything. I think the point is that you're planning ahead, because you're intending, there's intention and purpose in how you're going to observe this day. What was the second part?
That's okay. Is my connection a little bit better now?
I'm hearing you now, yeah.
Okay, I changed microphones. That might have helped. The other question, so I was asking about the sources of the angels in our tradition, because it's taken for granted. However, someone did add to that. The idea of a, quote, evil angel seems a little strange. Is that a good translation, i.e. a good angel versus an evil?
No, I'd call it a bad angel. I wouldn't call it an evil angel. I wouldn't make it that strong. The Bible speaks of malachim. Malach is a messenger, and I think you used that word a moment ago, Rabbi Mellinger. And this is where Morris Margolis has a compelling argument that this is a way to make God more tangible. I'm looking back here because I'm looking actually for a particular book. It is probably back here somewhere. It is called The Bodies of God, and it's by Benjamin Summer, and it's a marvelous book. And he talks about the biblical conception of God and how God could be manifest physically in a particular body, or even several bodies simultaneously in a place for a certain amount of time and then could move. And the best example of this is Genesis chapter 18, where Abraham is sitting outside his tent in the heat of the day and 3 visitors come to him. If you go and take a look at that, you will see that the first verse in chapter 18, if I'm not mistaken, says, God appeared to Abraham. And then we're told, Abraham looked up and he saw 3 men. Summer says that we need to understand, but because of all the years that have passed and all of the ways that we have been taught to think about God and taught not to think about God, that those 3 men were manifestations of God. They were bodies of God. That is how God was conceived in the ancient world. There was great more fluidity to God than we attribute in this day and age.
Want you to know, everyone loves the fact.
Think of him as an avatar of God or a manifestation of God. But you can also look at it as a piece of literature that's trying to convey that Abraham was right there with God, that there was a closeness and an intimacy and a connection and an encounter. Please use whatever language works for you.
Thank you. And everyone resonated with the candles being lit in the sink, especially they have cats. So that was a big hit with everybody.
Oh yeah, does anybody else put them in the kitchen sink?
Many people apparently.
Okay.
Anyone else have any other questions? Rabbi Litwak.
Absolutely.
The question for all of us is, what habits can we start forming and make them habits so that we have an easier time sticking with them? What makes Shabbat meaningful and enjoyable and pleasurable and purposeful, and sets us up to go into the next week with a sense of renewal and purpose? And how do we build that right into our lives so that seventh day is built into the structure of our lives? And before Rabbi Litwak says goodbye to everyone, let me say thank you again for allowing me to share this passage and the wisdom of the sages with everybody today. Thank you for this invitation. It has been a genuine pleasure. And I wish you all well, and I wish you the patience to stay safe and well.
Rabbi Scheinerman, thank you from all of us, the 100+ people who have come on. Thank you all participants. Want to just give you a little tidbit, a little taste for a couple of weeks from now. On July 19th, we know that the United States election is coming up in a couple of months, and this year, perhaps more than any other election, we feel as a Jewish community challenged. We feel divided in our how we approach it and who we are supporting. And we have a wonderful, wonderful teacher, Dr. Stephen Windmuller, who was now the emeritus director of the Zellico School for Not-for-Profit Management at Hebrew Union College, the school we used to refer to as the School of Communal Service. He is a prolific writer. He is very widely quoted and is, like Rabbi Scheinerman, a wonderful teacher. He's going to be talking about Jews and the 2020 election. I really strongly encourage you. He will challenge you in your thinking and broaden your how you are viewing whatever it is, however you're viewing the election. So please enjoy. We hope we'll see you back here, right here, same channels, same stuff. If it changes, we'll let you know. But otherwise, if you got here tonight, you can get here on July 19th, same time for each of your time zones. Again, thank you all for being with us. We hope you'll come back again. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, everybody, for
My
being
pleasure.
willing to rename yourself.